Thank you. Please be seated. Just as we begin, if you have something that looks like this, this would be a good time to turn it on to silent. Because if you don't, you know what will happen. It will be you. So I invite you if you wish. You know, friends, welcome to this celebration of the life of Jim August. I was thinking as I came in, it's appropriate that it's here at Thompson's on Broadway, one of the last funeral homes in downtown Winnipeg, the core area. This city that he loved so much. This city that Jim, more than anybody else I know, helped shape. There was a Jewish prophet named Jeremiah. He was not a bullfrog, who some 2,700 years ago said, "Seek the good of the city, for in its well-being you will find your own." Jim knew that, lived that. Yet as profound as that is, it's not really that we will miss so much, is it? It's Jim, our friend, father, grandfather, husband. And so we've gathered here this morning in person and online to celebrate the life and honor the memory of Jim August, to give thanks for his time among us, to express our inner gratitude for how he touched our lives. We gather as a diverse city, the diversity he loved, a community of different faiths, different perspectives, roles, rich, poor, more elite or more the street. We've gathered to offer as best we can our love and support to Sharon, Jesse, Allison, their families. To stand with them, cry with them perhaps, lend them our courage perhaps in the moments they falter, believe in them, and to remind each other that life is more than length of days, and the value of a human life is so much greater than could ever be expressed in a service like this. My name is Bill Miller, and I am deeply honored to be able to lead this service. It was my good fortune when I was at Knox United, across from Central Park, to work with Jim on the Central Park redevelopment, revitalization. He believed in us. I thought of him as a friend, but of course, we all did, didn't we? Our first reading is, a little bit more recent than Jeremiah. It's about 2,500 years old. Although if you're a certain age and have bald hair and a gray beard, you might have thought that Pete Seeger actually wrote these words, or the Byrds. They remain profound many years later. To everything there is a season. There is a right time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born, and a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep, and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to be far from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time for silence and a time for speaking, a time of love and a time of hate, a time of war and a time of peace. The second is a reading from Mary Oliver, not nearly that old, the last part of a poem called The Summer Day. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I've been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Tabitha Langell is going to lead us in a prayer. You can take off your mask.
Yes, that's good. I put my hearing aid on. Give me a minute. I have to follow Mary Oliver? Wow. Love her. Just a quick word of how I got to be here. My name is Tabitha, and I am one of the partners in Tallgrass Prairie, and I got to know Jim first as a neighbor. We lived on Kenora Street, a few houses down. Saw the kids grow up, was wonderful to watch that. Then we started the bakery, a few of us. Jim was starting the Forks. And after a few years, he came to me. He and I actually walked the loop, and Jim said, "You should come to the Forks. I want you at the Forks," which seemed so absurd from our tiny, cozy little Wolseley nest. And he didn't push, but he sure persevered. Yeah, he seems to have that power. And eventually, Jim convinced us that we should do this. And what was very special about that is the partners, so there were 5 of us then, decided my husband and I probably had the best gifts for this new venture. So they sent us to the Forks. I, an ex-Hutterite, my husband, an ex-monk. What did we know about negotiating with 3 levels of government? Jim always stayed the CEO. We always stayed a tenant. In between that, there were no boundaries. In retrospect, I realized he coached us so gently how to negotiate, we didn't know we were being coached. And the staff just loved him. Jim saw people, he didn't see tenants. And that was one of his great gifts. And I'm deeply grateful for that journey. And it was at the Forks that we formed a friendship over coffee and conversation, and yeah. And I really appreciate the honor of being here. So greetings to you all. Let us pray. Holy One, Holy Three, you beyond the galaxies and curled up in a leaf, we acknowledge you as creator and sustainer of life and love as we gather this morning to remember Jim August. We come to this place from many different places and paths and walks of life. Help us to be present to each other in a spirit of mourning, but also enliven in us a spirit of celebration as we remember a life given, a life well lived, and now transformed and changed. We ask that a spirit of comfort be with us all, but especially to Jim's immediate and extended family as they walk the path of loss and grief. May they know they are not alone. Help us to be present to them, and send your angels to bring light and love to the hard places and times of that journey. In closing, we ask that this time and place be blessed as we share tears and memories in a spirit of love and hope. Amen.
Thanks. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm trying to put the little fluffy thing on the end of the microphone. I may have done something very bad. I have no idea. I hope we're still working. Allison August is going to come and share some memories of her dad.
Good morning. Thank you, Tabita. That was beautiful. And thank you, Bill, for all you're doing for us. Oh, and thanks to all of you for joining us this morning to celebrate the life of our father and husband, Jim August. Growing up in a city like Winnipeg with the last name August meant there was always a good chance you'd be asked if you were any relation to Jim. I have always answered this question with a great deal of pride. Yes, he's my dad. He was a well-liked and well-connected guy in this town. And I truly think one of his best gifts was how he could bring people together in a space and make everyone feel welcome. That wasn't only true in business, but also with family and friends. Proof of this can be seen in the annual Thanksgiving celebrations held at our cottage in Victoria Beach, which swelled to nearly 40 guests some years, including both family and friends. It started as a more intimate gathering with just us and our good friends, the Perrys, and then we just kept inviting people. Our annual Christmas dinners with my Aunt Janice and cousins Kelly and Shannon and Uncle Dave also grew to include our good friends, the Kringans, for over a decade, year after year. You see, with Jim, the more really was the merrier. He was a social being and loved having things on the calendar to look forward to. In his final weeks and months, the social interactions he had with many of you in this room were pivotal in keeping his spirits high. And we thank you all for carving out that special time to spend with him. Our dad had an appreciation for all sorts of eclectic interests, but tennis and squash, music and art, and later in life, golf were all mainstays. His love of music was certainly passed down to Jesse and me, but Jesse in particular, and we've been to some really incredible shows together. Willie Nelson comes to mind, Bob Dylan, Leonard Cohen, Van Morrison, to name a few. He loved a good tune, and it'll be a while before I can listen to any of those artists without crying. He loved to travel and could often be found researching next year's accommodations while vacationing in Bucerias. He was a planner at heart. More often than not, however, he and my mom would wind up back at Vista Vallarta, where Jason, Juliet, Miles, and me were always welcome to bunk in year after year. Their casa doors were always open, and we feel so fortunate to have those memories to hold on to. He was a doer of things and a liver of life. This often meant if my mom or Jesse or I had an idea to do something, like apply for a new job, or take a trip, or work towards some new goal, he would be on us. So how's it going with that? Did you get that resume fixed up? Can I read over anything for you? You know who you should really talk to about this? He was a man of action and encouraged those of us around him to take action as well. We are better off for having had his encouragement, even if it felt a little annoying at times. He was certainly a busy guy as Jesse and I were growing up and became adults, but always made time to pick me up for regular lunch dates or go for a steak sandwich with Jesse to Ray and Jerry's. That one-on-one time where he could get caught up on what we were up to was never neglected. He was a dependable dad, the first to offer to help you paint your living room. He was a generous dad, helping both Jesse and me with down payments on our first homes, and he believed in calling it a hand up, not a handout. He was a playful dad and always had time for a rousing match of tickle time, as we called it as kids. My mother hated it. He was a loving grandpa and adored Juliet and Miles. He was loving and he was kind, and we will miss him. Love you, Dad.
When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words
Thanks, Rachel. You know, I can't think of words that are at the same time so characteristic of Jim and yet so opposite. For with people, that was it, wasn't it? Let it be. Relax. But with systems, with injustice, with things that needed to be changed, no. Get to work. Want to share, excuse me. Want to share with you some memories, some celebrations. First, this. That was on the website. Well, excuse me. Well, Jim's and my paths crossed as part of our professional careers. He with the Forks and me in the Premier's office. My fondest and most valued memories of Jim go back to the corner of College and McGregor and our time together at the North Y. In the 1970s, I was a leader in training for the leadership in the leadership program run by Jim. We can all point to people from our youth that had a major impact on our lives and the person that we strive to become. Jim was one of those people in my life. He led and taught by example. He demonstrated commitment, decency, and a wonderful sense of humor. Whether in a pickup game of basketball, on the badminton court, a drop kick fight on the trampoline. I don't know what that is. My mind is just trying to figure that one out. Anyways, a drop kick fight on the trampoline, or just hanging out in his office. He was a leader and mentor and a friend. Rest in peace, Augie. And thanks for all you gave me and the rest of the North Y gang. Michael Balagas. And some memories from Toby Chase. How fortunate to have been included in Jim's circle of close friends. Jim was well loved, respected, a guy with a big heart. We first met during our university days and reconnected later, working together over 30 years. Throughout his career, Jim built relationships, totally at ease with working with politicians, government, artists and architects, planners, business and community groups. It seemed he knew everyone. Yeah? Jim's charm and sense of humor were put to good use in his dealings with people from all walks of life. Jim managed the multifaceted core area initiative established in the 1980s by government to address the social, economic, and physical conditions in the inner city. His legacy lies in this first inner city revitalization model for cooperation between the three levels of government. He made it work. The success of this model laid the foundation for the renewal of the Forks. I valued Jim's insights and advice as a friend, loyal and supportive. He was the best man at my wedding. We shared so many great times and traditions, such as heading to Phoenix each spring with Roger and Lang to hone our golf game, always a work in progress. I'll miss our chats and our dinners discussing the politics of the day, playing music classics. The Wait by the band was one of Jim's all-time favorites, suggesting movies to see, debating the state of the Jets. Could still debate. It was always fun reminiscing about the good times back in the day, especially our 1980 New York visit after work conference, where we scored tickets outside a small theater to see a three-person play called American Buffalo, the rising star named Al Pacino, and seeing the legendary blues man James Cotton perform at the Lone Star Cafe later that evening. Jim was someone you enjoyed hanging out with. Through a donation to the Forks a few years ago, Jim and Sharon have a bench near the Human Rights Museum with a message by mystic and poet Rumi. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. Rest in peace, good friend. Toby. And from, and from Roger Brunet. I first met Jim when I started to work with the federal government, Employment and Immigration Canada, within the Employment Development Branch in 1978. Our responsibilities were establishing and monitoring business startups in rural Manitoba. Jimmy had already been working in this capacity for several years and mentored me through the various steps required to obtain government funding approval. For that generosity and patience, I will be forever grateful. We worked together in this capacity for 7 years until 1984, when Jim left the federal government to work as general manager for the newly formed Core Area Initiative. It was during those 7 years, from 77 to 84, that our strong friendship was developed. We both shared a passion for racket sports, tennis and squash, in addition to golf and even running. The other area of common interest was, of course, politics, including ways to effectively manage programs with the ever-changing political landscape in all 3 levels of government. In 1985, I asked Jim to be my best man. He quickly accepted, and he and Sharon volunteered to host a large part of the wedding day's festivities at their home. Their generosity in making this day memorable will be cherished forever. In the early 80s, Jim and I, and 3 other co-workers, participated on a Manitoba Marathon corporate relay team. We trained and partied extremely hard. I don't know which that is. We trained, anyways, and we came in first place. It was the thrill of a lifetime getting on that podium and being interviewed by CBC's Scott Oak. In the 80s and 90s, the Winnipeg Canoe Club was the recreational hub of our city. It was here that we spent many hours practicing and perfecting our tennis and squash skills. Jim and I became doubles tennis partners and participated in many city and provincial-wide tennis tournaments. It was an honor to play with Jim because he always respected his opponent and knew the true meaning of sportsmanship. Even when a line was called inaccurate, in my opinion, he would just tell me, "Relax, Roger. It's his call. Let it be." And we would move on. Roger also mentioned, by the way, that Jim was the only guy he knew who could play squash with Gary Dewar and next week with Gary Filman. Somehow. However, there was one downside to having Jimmy as a doubles tennis partner. It's a well-known fact that he had a passion for expensive suits and also for expensive tennis sports clothing. I guess the idea was that if you dressed like Bjorn Borg, you might end up playing like him. Therefore, in order for me to be his partner, I had to supplement my income by selling Christmas oranges in the North End. In the past 20 years, golf became our sport of choice, primarily to accommodate our aging bodies. For several years, Jim, Toby, and Lang organized our annual winter golf holiday in Phoenix. This included 5 courses in 6 days, and some of the private courses we played on were PGA Tour caliber. Where Jim stands out as a close friend was his willingness to advise me on some pretty delicate personal matters at critical times in my life. This includes listening to my concerns and advising me on a timely career move. He was honest with me when a relationship was not working out and encouraged me to do something about it. Lastly, he passed on some information about a friend's house that was up for sale in Norwood Flats and insisted we make every effort to view it. So it turns out we bought the house. We've been living in Norwood for 36 years. We've raised 2 children in that house and built a life complete with family and meaningful relationships. For all these things, I want to thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, Sharon, because I know that behind the scenes, you have been a positive force and rock for Jimmy over the 50-plus years of your partnership. To sum up, it was a privilege to be Jimmy's friend. He was fair, honest, honorable, a mentor, my go-to guy, and he was also a great listener. He has inspired me and many of us to be the best we could be, and to be more caring. On the caring side of the equation, I think Jim would encourage us all to kick it up a notch, especially with our loved ones and ones less fortunate. Jimmy, I'll always love you like a brother. Adieu, mon ami. With these words, beginning our memories. Recreating within us, as if need be, our gratitude for Jim. There are 4 people who are going to come forward, and I won't introduce each one as they come, to offer their memories. Randy Melnick, Michael Shane, Harry Finnegan, and then Drew Perry.
Well, good day, dear family and friends of recently deceased James August, also affectionately known as Augie by a large group of early day friends. Just a short tribute to a long-lasting friendship. It began back in the mid-50s on the same North End street. Kids building snow forts in Jim's backyard to offset the enemy from streets to the east. After all, the neighborhood's boomers were somewhat territorial back in '55. Inside the fort was a safe place to plan the next move and carry out the fantasies of childhood. Full-blown and adorned with Davy Crockett headgear, if you will, and cap guns, remember? Jim's home was the kind of a place where a friend of his could come any given morning and Mrs. August would serve up the milk, toast, and jam. Well, we breathed in the coffee aroma. Jim's dad, Howard, would interject with opinions on things from the living room chair at the corner window while we wafted the toast down. Openness was in the air, and conversation flowed. In a blink, we were older, 10 and 11, drawing together in Jim's basement pad, drawing maps of strategic warfare. And get this, Jim illustrated how to make maps authentic. What you do is you burn the edges of the page. To give it that historical appearance. Presto, history was made. Pretty cool, I thought. In another blink, we were adolescents. Time to really be cool. And I think Jim was the first guy around to don a Perry Como sweater, Continental slacks, shiny banana-toed shoes, all of which enhance his moves on the teen dance floor, many that rocked under the roof of the North End YMCA. And this is where Jim's ability to communicate and negotiate personably was seeded. It was the start of the path towards his accomplishments in bettering the environment of the inner city while mindfully including the youth of the day. Jim's connection with the Y continued into adulthood, employed with the new Westminster, BC arm. As I also lived there, we had a very eventful, and I'm putting this quite mildly, social life, taking in much of the club and music scene that leaned towards the blues and jazz venues. I remember him and I driving down to Seattle to catch the famous trumpeter Freddie Hubbard's gig in a busy night in a dark and smoky club. We maneuvered in uncharted territory with laughs and gusto. But that was just one part of it. The home front was there. Many comfortable evenings were spent in the cozy ambience of the dinner his beloved Sharon had prepared, with Jesse Winchester singing quietly in the background, the turntable spinning tirelessly. Yes, the home front was alive and well, especially one afternoon when Jim did something to irritate the neighbors' domestic ducks on 140th Street. The ducks took chase, snapping at the now running for it Jim's back of knees and calves. Sharon, standing at their back door, quickly realized the intensity of the situation and acted. Opened the door as Jim flew through and slammed it shut just in time for the hapless ducks to careen into. It was poetry in motion, which was indeed a clear indication of how Jim and Sharon managed their domestic affairs. And once during a late night gabbing session, Jesse, who was an infant then, began to wail from the bedroom. The house shook, the neighborhood dogs whined. It was a 7.5 on the Richter scale earthquake that shattered high-rise windows in downtown Vancouver. Jim, also ready to quickly acted, grabbed Jesse, ran out in the backyard and hovered over him in a posture of protection until the ground became quiet again. And on to Mount Baker. Many, many events, so many to remember. With its challenging downhill ski runs, being prairie boys, we never mastered any black diamond runs, but could do difficult blue ones, albeit with questionable style. The laughing persisted. I remember mid-70s, Jim made quite a sudden announcement that the family was moving back to the Peg. He had had a strong premonition that his life would change. It was just a gamble at this point, but his intuition proved true with becoming involved with Winnipeg's Core Area Initiative project. He made solid friendships with like-minded individuals such as Harry Finnegan and Toby Chase, Bill Norrie, and many more, all of whom were dedicated in making Winnipeg better. Jim was in his element. He became an integral force in creating the Peg's own backyard, the Forks, the success that it is. Back in 2003, Jim's very close friend, Gary Painter, was succumbing to cancer. Elements of character surfaced during times of duress. With empathy and compassion, Jim initiated gatherings of old friends to put Gary into a meaningful comfort zone. That's the kind of guy he was. And this comfort zone included serious discussions that morphed into the laugh of the day around a table at Alicia's restaurant. Fast forward a decade or so, the development of the Forks was in full swing. The timing of the onset of Jim's own debilitating affliction allowed him to accomplish that. He made a courageous decision. Life without quality was not on the table. Jim's person, his warmth, his spirit will remain in our memory. So long, friend, so long, friend. I can still hear you laughing.
So nice to see so many friends and admirers of Jim here today. I've come with a number of serious and somber things to say, but I wondered if I could start at a different place for a moment, just having heard some of the things that have been said so far. First, Jim was a terrible planner. My favorite story is, and we joked about it for years, is the time that he had in his calendar, he was at the Forks at the time, he had in his calendar that he had a lunch at Bombolini's, but he'd neglected to write down who it was with. And Bombolini's having been a very popular place at the time, and Jim knowing everybody in town, it was quite a story the way he recounted trying to figure out which table he was supposed to sit at. A lot of people have talked about a number of his qualities in organizing and getting things done. I was very lucky over the years to have been a guest at the August residence on many, many, many occasions. One particularly special one was when my mother was very ill 14 years ago, and Sharon was out of the country in India, and Jim and I, we were dorm mates for 6 weeks. I'm not sure how that apartment ever recovered, but it was an experience. I was always surprised in years hence that the August moved without checking with me whether I liked the accommodation. Let me say this one other thing before I start with my formal comments. I haven't lived here since a very long time ago, 1978. But to be in the audience here this morning and listen to the people who've spoken so far and the length of time that they've been friends with Jim, I mean, I really just don't know what else you need to know about somebody other than that. So let me just turn to what I wrote and have practiced 1,000 times as if I was about to speak to the United Nations because I'm so nervous. Like you, I'm here today to celebrate the life of an extraordinary member of this community, a man whose impact will be felt for generations. Others have spoken of Jim as a husband and father and a vital member of this city. You'll forgive me if I choose to use the few moments that I have to speak selfishly about him as my close friend of almost 4 decades. Let me start by saying how much Jim would have liked the jacket I'm wearing. Given the dandies we both were, he would have never missed the opportunity to ask me where I got the jacket, or the tie, or the shirt, or the shoes. But he would have wondered why I'm wearing a brown belt, and I would have had to explain that I forgot my black belt at home. he would also have commented on what a shame it was that I have to pay Toronto prices. I will forever miss that easy banter between us, and ironically, I'll be sorry to have had the last word. What made Jim August a generational figure wasn't what he did, but how he did it. He was open, engaging, and always interested in adding to the sum total of his knowledge and experience. He genuinely created room for those he interacted with to be partners and co-collaborators by allowing this space for opinions, outlooks, and approaches other than his own. He didn't need to be the smartest guy in the room, the loudest, or the last one speaking. In that way, he was a leader and a mentor in the very best ways those words can be used, and I admired him endlessly for those attributes. Until recent days, Jim and I had spoken 3 or 4 times a week since he first took ill in late 2019. And while the topics and length of our discussions changed over time, the steady rhythm of conversation didn't. Over the past while, as talking by phone became a bit more challenging, I taken to writing Jim, always copying Sharon so she could share my messages with him. The last note I sent was about what our friendship meant to me. And as luck would have it, I wrote this to him the day before he died. I'd like to share this final correspondence with you, knowing that my sentiments about Jim will undoubtedly ring true for many of you. Good morning. No matter how hard I try, I want to begin whatever I send to you by saying that I'm hoping today is a better or easier day for you. I'm sure that sounds ridiculous, given the state you're in at the moment. Forgive me for being such a determined denier of reality. I seem reluctant to give up on hoping for miracles, even now. It's part of my lifelong confusion for seeing things for what they could be, rather than for what they are. Thankfully, I know you know that about me. It's Monday morning, and while I'm hopeful we'll see each other this Thursday, I know it's possible that our visit this weekend will be one of our last. While I want what's best for you and your family, and want your struggling and suffering to be gone, know that I'm very annoyed that you'll be leaving me. Please read this in the very selfish tone in which it was written. The complex set of emotions I'm feeling at my end have caused me to stop and reflect on just how magical it is that people become friends, and more to the point, close and good friends. How it is that they become part of the fabric of each other's lives. How two people's relationship can carry on for almost 40 years like one uninterrupted conversation, despite the regular and sometimes unexpected change in topics. It really is an intriguing part of the human experience, and it's caused me to reflect on what has drawn me to you and what I respect most about you. From the earliest stages of knowing you in the mid-'80s, we found a common and large basket of shared interests. We both share a passion for the communities that we work and live in, how to make them better, and generally for those people who need a hand up most. In that same vein, we've shared an interest in public discourse and good ideas that we support and have often advocated for. You've made Winnipeg a better place to live in countless ways. And given my never-ending love affair with the city, I've admired your work, your impacts, and the very deft ways you've knitted together people who otherwise wouldn't have found themselves at the same social gathering. That, perhaps more than any of the buildings or programs you've been responsible for, may be your greatest legacy. That uncanny ability to bring people together in a way that gets them to check their membership cards at the door. I've learned a great deal from you in that way. That aspect of your character reminds me of that wonderful compliment Magic Johnson's former NBA coach once paid the superstar when he said, "What makes Magic so extraordinary is that he gets such a charge out of making other people play better." That, to me, is one of the highest callings in life, and both a skill and a virtue that you possess. And like my marriage, there are special ways in which we connect because we are opposites. I'm a person whose head is in the clouds much of the time, thinking of things that might be, that might be done. Not that you've been without grandiose ambitions at times, but your feet have always been much closer to the ground than mine, always with a practical lens for thinking through how some idea or venture could actually be achieved, having somehow cobbled together the necessary quilt work of alliances and resources. Great respect and admiration are a complex and layered set of feelings to have for another person. So much unspoken reflection goes into arriving at a point where one realizes that you're interested in everything that other person says, and that you rely on their advice because you have a long history of smart, well-reasoned, and empathic conversations with them. I feel and have long felt that type of connection with you, in large part because you've been involved in most of the major decisions in my adult life. You'll forgive me for not finding a way to be even more articulate in conveying the power of that thought, but I know you know what I mean. I'm writing through tears now, so perhaps I'll stop here for the moment. While too often in life feelings go unspoken, I need you to know that you've had an enormous impact on my life, all of it for the better. Can there be anything greater than that to draw from a friendship between two people? Not in my book. That's the pinnacle. I hope you have a relatively easy day. Thinking of you and Sharon in these trying times. Much love, Michael.
This past Sunday, I attended a celebration of life for one of my McKay cousins. And one of the teachings, Indigenous teachings that came out at that event was how the most important thing we can give somebody is water. Without water, we can't survive. And when we're in a gathering like we are today, the tears that we shed for a loved one is perhaps one of the greatest things we can give. And we're all unique human beings, and we deal with grief and mourning in different ways. Here's what I wrote. You never know when it will happen. When you first meet someone special, and that person ends up becoming a lifelong friend. That's what happened to me in 1982 when I first met Jim August. I had agreed to help out the Winnipeg Quarry Initiative in developing a neighborhood plan for the North Logan area. It was quite a contentious issue at the time. The office, which had just opened, had a very small staff, and at that time, Jim had been seconded to the office by the federal government. There he was. I was immediately taken by his magnetic personality, sense of humor, his inquisitive nature, and very positive attitude. Even back then, Jim was the best dressed person in the room. Over coffee one day, we discovered that we both had gone to Sisler High School. Now, Jim was a few years older than me, so back in high school, our paths never crossed. Without knowing it at the time, we both had grown up just a few streets over from each other, Jim on Tinniswood, me on Boyd Avenue at Radford. When I found this out, I asked Jim, "So Jim, did you ever go drinking at the Stinkin' Lincoln?" He chuckled, like you. And then he explained to me that, in fact, during their first year of marriage, he and Sharon had lived in the Manitoba housing complex located right behind the Lincoln Motor Hotel on McPhillips. Suffice to say, those two newlyweds did not live in the lap of luxury in those beginning times. In the years and decades that followed, Jim never forgot where he came from. In fact, he dedicated most of his career, as we've already heard today, to helping to improve the quality of life for inner city residents in Winnipeg. As our careers often intersected, and it was really a privilege to really work with him on so many interesting projects in our city, it was really a privilege. So while I got to know him as a co-worker and colleague, the thing that I really valued more than anything is how I got to know Jim as a friend and a neighbor. We raised our children in Wolseley, living one street over from each other. And for the past 18 years, we have been neighbors in the Osborne Village area. It's really been over the past 3 years that I've really gotten to know Jim. It's during the time that he had to face head-on the shock first of his vascular dementia diagnosis and the unavoidable impact that he realized it was going to have on him and his family. How one deals with the reality of one's imminent and eventual death is one way to take the measure of a person. Jim was an inspiration to me in this regard, and I'm really glad that I got to tell him how much I admired his wisdom and his courage. As the disease slowly chipped away at the quality of his life, Jim avoided dwelling on what he had lost and instead focused on what he was still able to do. When he could no longer play tennis, he focused on his golf swing. When his license was revoked and he could no longer drive, he took pleasure in riding his bike. When riding a bike proved too much of a challenge, Jim enjoyed walking in the neighborhood. Jim and I have been walkers for years, commuting to our respective places of work on foot whenever we could. Would often bump into each other to and from work. But in recent years, during my daily walks, I would often bump into Jim and Sharon, both walkers. And they always looked so cute together. There was Sharon always by his side, keeping up the pace, her 2 steps for his every one. Now, Jim and I ended up arranging to walk together over the last year, on average about once a week. I even thought of promising Sharon that our walking route would never go by Hanford Druitt. The source, as many of you know, of many of Jim's stylish suits, shirts, and ties, a place that he simply could never resist. Hanford Druitt, a Jim magnet. Now, this past year, we were 2 of thousands of Winnipeggers who were able to enjoy the winter wonderland that was created on the Assiniboine and Red Rivers. It really was an amazing thing to experience, and we were blessed with a pretty decent winter by Winnipeg standards. Jim was always keen to stop by the various art installations and not just walk by them. He would always stop, look at each work of art, think about it, then comment on it. He loved art. He had a really discerning eye, and over the years bought a lot of it and has a great collection to give to his family. So we all know that guys are generally not known for being able to open up, to show their softer sides. The last year with Jim was truly an exception. During our most recent walks together, Jim talked to me about how thankful he was for the life that he had been given, for Sharon and the love and support that she gave him over 52 years of marriage, for their children, Jesse and Allison, and the good choices of partners they had made, and of course, how thankful he was for his beautiful grandchildren, Juliet and Miles. While Jim formally retired in 2014, he never stopped giving back to our community as a volunteer. Among his many volunteer contributions, Jim served as chair of the board of directors of the University of Winnipeg's Community Renewal Corporation. At Jim's invitation, about 3 years ago, I was invited to join that board. And as such, I got to witness firsthand the incredible leadership that he gave to that very important nonprofit corporation during a time when it was going through a really challenging situation where it lost its visionary founding CEO, Sherman Kreiner of blessed memory, to cancer. Jim's leadership enabled the corporation to actually build hundreds of affordable housing in our city, including the most recently completed West Broadway Commons in partnership with All Saints Church. Now, Jim was a proud graduate of the University of Winnipeg. He began his studies as an adult several years after leaving Sisler High School. In recognition of his significant contributions to the university and his legacy in general, today, as we are gathered, flags at the University of Winnipeg campus are being flown at half-mast in Jim's memory. Having been a bit of a rascal in high school, I'm sure that Jim, while the boy growing up in the North End, would never have imagined this happening. Flags at half-mast in his honor. I had my last walk in the neighborhood with Jim on October 29th. To me, that walk was a gift in many ways. When we began the walk, Jim seemed like his old self, Augie. But after about the minutes went by, and by 30 minutes, some of the cognitive challenges he was dealing with became very apparent. Jim was aware enough of this, and it was very upsetting for him. Jim's was a life well lived. There's no question about that. And one through which so many significant contributions to our community were made, and there's no question about that. It's very hard to let go of a longtime friend, but he is at peace now. I shall remember Jim fondly and with love.
I'm Drew Perry. I'm the last of the speakers. I know you've been sitting for a while. If anyone wants to stand up and stretch. I'll only be another hour or so. Good to have a few yoga moves. So I'd like to thank Bill for his work today and leading up to today. Allison for those loving remarks about her dad, and everyone else who shared words today as we celebrate and honor Jim's life. It was several years ago that I spoke at the service of an old good friend, Sheldon Oberman. And after the service, Jim came up to me and said he liked my remarks and he appreciated them, and could I speak at his memorial service? And I said, well, that's funny. I'd like you to speak at mine. So here I am. It's an honor to say a few words of personal remembrance. Being in this building also brings back some memories. My dad was a minister and conducted many funerals here in this building. He was one of the on-call ministers for Thompson's at the time, so when someone didn't have a minister, they would sometimes call him up and he'd come out and do a service. And sometimes, out in the prairie cemeteries, with very few people gathered there, he would stand in the cold, and one of the people at Thompson's then gave him a fur hat so he could withstand these cold winter funerals. My dad would say that memorial services are not for the dead, they're for the living. And at the time I thought that was a little cold-hearted, but I understand better what he meant now. These services are for us, for the family and friends and acquaintances who remain, so that we can comfort each other. So the stages of death, as Elizabeth Kubler-Ross told us, are many, and the stages of grieving are also many. And we can work through those and help each other, and coming together and hearing words of remembrance can be one of those stages on the road to healing. Writing these words today has helped me come to terms with the loss of Jim, and I'm hoping that sharing these words and the words you've heard will help you. Jim visited me in my dreams last night. And also, I heard the words of a prophet of our times, Bruce Springsteen. And Bruce says that he believes the afterlife consists of our individual consciousness being absorbed by the collective consciousness of friends and those who love the deceased. And that you live on in those memories and the shared times. So my wife Val and I first met Jim and Sharon in the 80s, as many of us did, just before they moved on to the same block on Kenora Street where we already lived. And that move turned out to be such a blessing to our lives. We both have daughters, Allison and Megan, who were friends then and have remained friends. Jesse would come and babysit sometimes for us when he wasn't skateboarding down the street. And later on, Jesse bought and lived in the house that Val's grandmother had lived in on Arlington Street before moving to Vancouver. Jim and Sharon's friendship with us over the years has enriched our lives immensely, as I know it has for many here. When I first met Jim, he was working at the Corey area, and I was director of the provincial daycare program. And one day, Jim said he wanted to come and talk to me about childcare needs in the inner city. He wanted to understand what some of the needs and roadblocks were. And I still remember that meeting as unlike any meeting I had before or even since. Jim arrived on his own. Nice jacket, of course, but no tie. He was casual. He sat on my couch and we chatted. So there was no agenda. He chatted openly about and knowledgeably about the needs and issues in the inner city when it came to childcare. And he encouraged me to open up more frankly than I usually did about the roadblocks that we felt and faced with childcare. He wanted to know what the Corey area could do and to took that information and went away to use that in his work. So I learned firsthand how Jim could make people feel at ease, get them to open up, and how a business meeting could be like a casual conversation, but still meaningful and productive. A few years later, Jim and Sharon were visiting some mutual friends at Victoria Beach, and Val and I had built a place there a few years before, and we dropped by to have a visit. We told them that about our place, and they didn't realize that, or Jim didn't realize that building lots were still available. So he wanted to see them. So we immediately jumped on our bikes. I took him around to see some lots that were still available. He wanted to buy one right away, being impulsive as he was, and I mean that in a good way. And they did buy the lot. They put up a cottage the next year, and that was the beginning of many years of our families sharing time on the beach, dinners on the porches, and then leading to travel together with Jim and Sharon. Jim loved what the beach had to offer, the golfing, the tennis, the cycling, and he and I ended up one crazy fall day riding from Winnipeg to Victoria Beach on our bikes, stopping before we got there at the Birchwood for a drink, and surviving those narrow shoulders or unpaved shoulders. Jim and I rediscovered golf there one fall day, and we hadn't golfed since our youth, and we were immediately hooked, or maybe it was sliced. Jim soon wanted to play a lot more golf than me, and hooked up with other people there. He joined Bob Lawler, John Gow, Terry Angus, Tim Hebert, Don Marine. And as his golf days wound down, the Thursday gatherings that John and Terry and Bob had out there became important to him. They wanted Jim to keep coming on Thursdays after they played golf to join them for a drink at the beach. And those gatherings became very important to Jim. Sometimes he would even drive out to the beach on Thursday mornings specifically to be there and be part of those gatherings. So, as we all know, Jim was a people person. He seemed to know everybody, everywhere he went. Any restaurant, any gathering. So even on the streets of Mexico, Jim would run into people he knew, walking the streets or the beaches. One day in San Miguel de Allende, he was walking down the street, a car pulled up, and a prominent Winnipeg businessman rolled down the window and said, "Hey Jim, welcome to San Miguel. Come on over to my place for dinner." Another day, the artist that had bought their house on Kenora Street bumped into Jim, told him about the little pirate theater that showed pirated movies for the cost of a glass of wine, and invited them over to her house to meet other Winnipeg expats that were there. Jim and I had the pleasure also of being in the same men's book club. He loved reading the books, but as we all know, books aren't the purpose of a book club. He enjoyed the camaraderie and the easy banter of a group of guys that were plugged into the life of Winnipeg and the province, or at least they pretend to be plugged in. As you know, and as others have said, Jim had an impeccable fashion sense. And I admired his clothes, and on the golf course I'd drop a few hints about maybe I could give a home to some of these clothes as he was finished with them. And he never took me up on that. I think he didn't want a friend wearing his hand-me-downs. But 2 or 3 years ago, as I made my twice-annual trip to the local Sally Ann, trolling for bargains on the shelves, I came across a couple of nice sports coats. They were my size and a good price, so I bought them and took them home, tried them on, and reached in the pocket and pulled out a wad of business cards that said, "The Forks, North Portage. Jim August, CEO." And this is one of those jackets. So we should have known that something was starting to not be right for Jim when one day in early fall 2016. We were having another one of the long lamentations and discussions about Donald Trump perhaps being elected president. And Jim, was usually the astute political observer, said, "Well, it doesn't really matter, does it? How bad can it be?" And over the next couple of years, he had occasion to remember that comment with chagrin and realize he'd been terribly wrong and apologized for it. He wondered what he'd been thinking. So dementia is an insidious disease. So it relentlessly, incrementally takes away what we value most: our memories and skills, our ability to enjoy life. In seemingly random ways, it erodes many of the qualities that make us unique. In my father's case, as he lived with his Alzheimer's, he seemed blissfully unaware of the losses that were happening, and that was a blessing. In Jim's case, however, his dementia was quite the opposite. He was well aware of each loss of his abilities. It could be a daily agony for him. He was upset with the losses that had already occurred, as well as anxious about the ones that were sure to come. Fortunately, there were still lovely moments here and there. He and I had what turned out to be our last walk together, about 10 days, probably the day before Harry's walk with Jim. We went to the new diversity garden at the Assiniboine Park. He recalled his involvement on the board of the Conservancy when the planning for that place was being done, and he remembered the hard work getting all the funding committed for it. And he was very pleased with the results of that early work that he saw. He was also still following current events, and he had a few appropriate comments to make about the recent leadership race for the new premier. And he also talked proudly about his two grandchildren, Juliet and Miles, and their school experiences this fall. So while Jim's death feels like it came way too soon, it seems that with dementia, if you don't die too soon, it can quickly become too late. Many of us dream about living lives that allow us to accomplish something that's meaningful while also helping others. Jim was able to achieve those dreams more than most of us have or will. For that, we can all be thankful for his dedication, skill, enthusiasm, curiosity, and just plain decency. I know that few legacies are simply personal ones. Good things often require contributions and goodwill from many partners. And Jim was especially skilled at navigating the complexities that come with different organizations trying to work together. He seemed to be able to move through that multi-layered world with apparent ease. And through it all, he was widely respected and well-liked, as is apparent today. So today we remember and honor Jim August for a life well-lived and as a man who is truly well-loved.
The fluffy thing is off, but I'm just going to leave it. Apparently, the people are a little taller than I am. I want to invite you to take a moment. And in the way that is natural for you, whatever is most comfortable for you, to offer your gratitude for your life, your connection, your relationship with Jim. Take a moment. So as we do that, you might be thinking, I was thinking of being cool, something that always kind of eluded me. Ability to have your tie stay straight, You might think of conversations. You might think of how, for somebody who accomplished so much, how could it be that relationships would still trump accomplishments? You might think of compassion and action. You might think that with tenderness still he would lived with courage, died with courage. We are grateful that he was such a person, that now our sorrow is real and our loss great. And so collectively as a community, we offer a prayer, a deep wish, an intention for those closest to him: Sharon, Jesse, Allison, their families, his closest friends and their families. That for all of them, losing Jim will not cause them to think less of life, but more. That they won't harden their hearts in self-protection or close themselves in despair or cynicism. That they won't withdraw from others, but will engage more readily with others. All the more eager to make life not only bearable, but joyful and triumphant for all who struggle, for all who walk this earth. May those closest to Jim feel our collective intention to hold them. May they feel the collective gratitude of this city. And may, above all, they know themselves to have been true and well loved. And even as we hold them in our minds and hearts, we also hold the family and friends of Janice Beatty, Jim's sister, who died in 2020 and, like so many, passed away without a chance to really honor her or her memory. We hold in our minds and hearts all those who have died over this last 18 months without perhaps a proper send-off. We pray that all who carry unsettledness in losing others may find peace in company with other humans, with other friends, companions. And may the love and gratitude that this community now offers bring healing and comfort to all. So may we find in each other compassion, grace, amazing grace. Thanks, Herschel. You know, as mentioned, there's a bench donated by Jim and Sharon near the Museum of Human Rights, and quotes Rumi, who lived, Sufi mystic, 800 years ago. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field. I'll meet you there. There's another of his poems. It's called Bird Wings. Your grief for what you've lost lifts a mirror up to where you're bravely working. Expecting the worst, you look, and instead, here's the joyful face you've been wanting to see. Your hand opens and closes, and opens and closes. If it were always a fist, or always stretched open, you would be paralyzed. Your deepest presence is in every small contracting and expanding. The two as beautifully balanced and coordinated as bird wings. The poem, of course, is about what we do. We who have lost Jim, especially those closest to him. Those who loved him most will miss him the deepest. Opening and closing. Our fists, our hands, ourselves. Not getting stuck. That's the dilemma. What do we do now? Now, many, perhaps most religions have some kind of a teaching of that which is beyond this life. You know, for Christians, Muslims, Baha'i, and Sufi, they use the word breath, which means spirit. It's the essence of the person, that it doesn't die when the body dies. It goes to a different realm, a different home. Jesus in Christian teaching said, in my Father's house there's many rooms. That's why I've told you that I'm going to prepare a room for you. Get one ready for you. A metaphor, of course. Zoroastrians believe the soul hangs around for a few days and then an angel comes and takes it away. Ojibwe teachings is that after we die, our spirits begin a journey for 4 days westward, a journey to happiness. Now, apparently in Mohawk teaching, it takes a little bit longer, 10 days before the souls arrive at the place of their ancestors. Now, for Japanese Buddhists, they say the journey takes 49 days. I'm not sure the length of time matters. What if all these teachings, though, aren't just metaphors? They are metaphors, but what if they're not just wishful thinking? What if there's some kind of intuitive knowledge here? What if there's really something there? You know, it seems a little bit crazy, but would it be any crazier than the idea that you could have two objects that are halfway across the universe from each other, that when one changes, it changes the other one instantly? That's entanglement. And one of the things that quantum has shown is that such a crazy thing exists. Einstein said, this is spooky. There are many mysteries that we don't understand. I invite you to simply be open, if you will, to that which we can only now speak of in metaphors. What do we do? At these times, maybe metaphors are our only reliable guides. So if this makes any sense to you, I want to invite you, if you will, to stand and to join me now in, if you would stand, in releasing Jim to that which we cannot explain or footnote or cite. That which is life itself, love itself. In many of these ancient teachings, somehow there is dust that is taken, and into that dust, life is breathed. We come to have personality. And then there comes a time that the life can no longer be contained in those elements, in that dust, in those molecules. And so these we return to the earth, grateful, thankful for how they have carried us. But the life that we commend to this universe, to that which is far greater than we could ever know or imagine. And if you will, we release Jim into the love and care that is beyond our understanding. We'll meet you there, Jim. So I invite you to think as you go forward. We know what Jim did with his one wild and precious life. What do we do with ours? I invite you to carry them forward. You know, in mystic Judaism, there are two deaths. The first death occurs when the body dies, and the second is when your name is no longer spoken. So tell stories. Keep Jim alive. In all of these ways, Jim lives on in us. Take the best that was in Jim and incorporate that more fully into yourself. Find a million ways of noticing Jim. Every time you actually can tie a tie and it looks okay, when you look in the mirror and think, oh, damn, I look good, think of Jim. When you've got a moment of compassion, when you are actually involved in making something happen, give thanks. When you drive around our city and see the Central Park or the Forks, give thanks. You carry him forward in your living until that time when we too will be beyond what we can now imagine. I invite you then to believe in one another. Jim believed in you, still does. Believe in one another. The memories that right now are so tender, they will become your strength in the future. It's a wonderful world. It's a wondrous world. Courage is not about being afraid. It's about never letting fear determine our actions. Jim lived and died and loved with courage. Loved courageously. Hold one another's hands. Offer grace to one another. There are kids to love, neighborhoods to revive. And may you carry Jim into all your relations, all our relations. We are all related. Amen. As our service ends, I want to thank Rachel and Neil for the music. Rachel and Neil were part also of the Central Park revitalization and renewal with the World Village Gospel Choir, and working now on writing with the Métis Choir and writing an opera on Louis Riel. Watch for it. Seems appropriate, doesn't it? You will be led upstairs to a reception room. We invite you to come and to join us. Thank you all very much for coming out.